Hi folks, if you're joining us now, we are, this is the Salt at Home with Windows, Linux, and WSL session. We'll start just a minute after the hour, probably. Oh, here it is. Let's see.
Yes, the camera is working.
And I can hear you great.
And I'm not hearing anything yet.
Can you hear me? Hey folks in the chat, maybe let us know whose audio you can hear. Probably both, but okay.
Hi.
Hi, Hans, we can hear you just fine.
Speakers.
Testing.
Playback device.
Test.
I don't have any audio.
Test here, I'll Slack him. Oh!
Yeah, I have audio, but only through... Do you hear echo now?
It sounds great to me.
Oh, okay. That's surprising, because there should be a time delay about a second between that audio, that microphone, and oh, fine. Okay. I am, by the way, extremely nervous.
No, that is fine.
Pretty much terrified and everything. So that's a thing.
It'll be nice to you. Don't worry.
I don't know why I'm so terrified about all this. It's normally smaller presentations or whatever at work. I have no problems whatsoever, and this is just.
This is a very friendly crowd, so.
That I must say, it's. I've seen a couple of open source communities, and they are often quite abrasive. And the SaltStack community is really friendly, and that's a nice change of pace.
No, absolutely. All right, I think we're about ready to start. So Hans has asked for the questions to be saved till the end. I found that the Q&A tab has been really useful. If you have questions, you can put them in there. And so quick little bit about Hans. He is a mechanical engineer by education, a tech generalist by trade. He's played with Linux, Red Hat Debian for over 2 decades, and Unix, Open Solaris, and Open Indiana for almost as long. Hans owns a soldering iron and is only slightly afraid to use it.
I've only burnt myself once really badly.
That's
and
pretty
often
good.
Not as badly.
More often, not as bad.
They are hot.
They are. All right.
Okay.
Whenever you are ready.
I'm not, but as ready as I can get. Let's see. So this is the first time for me, and there was this option, if I can remember, to okay, why is my presentation mode share screen? do you now see the presentation?
Yeah, it looks great.
Perfect. So, good afternoon. And yeah, so I am Hans Strijker. I am a mechanical engineer and not a DevOps engineer. So my experience is quite a bit, maybe a bit less than the other presenters you've seen today. So take anything I say with a grain of salt, if you will. So I am a mechanical engineer, and these are pretty much some of the functions I've had in the past years. And maybe you can say that, yeah, I'm that 40-year-old from Where Sunscreen Commencement essay. And some of the most interesting 40-year-olds I know still don't know what they want to do when they grow up. So I'm a mechanical engineer, not a DevOps engineer. IT has been my hobby for over 20 years, and I've integrated quite a few aspects of IT in my mechanical engineering jobs. I don't really like to do repeated work, so if I can automate some processes in product design, I try to do that. And I'm using various tools, sometimes Visual Basic, sometimes just scripting or anything. I'm orienting this talk to more the hobbyists, because there are so many people who really, really know their stuff. I can't compete with that, and I don't want to compete with that. That's out of my reach for the moment still. So I'm trying to orient this a little bit more to the hobbyist, and I'm trying to minimize jargon, but that's sometimes a little bit difficult with this subject, obviously. I mean, salt is not something you just start. My environments are generally hybrid environments. I'm running Windows for my desktop and my laptops, and Debian mostly now for my servers. I still have a Solaris server, and I have Raspbian, and I'm working a little bit with Red Hat systems just to mess around, but mostly it's Debian and Windows. It's all for my own systems, so it's small scale. It's like a dozen systems maximum. So my history with IT. It started off in 1999 when I installed a Red Hat side by side to Windows. And in 2004, I had my first experience with a Lightning versus a hard drive, which didn't really go well for the hard drive. I got most of my data back, but yeah, it showed me the importance of backup solutions, which I started in 2007 with Solaris, with ZFS, if you will. And at first I just have two systems, which was easier to manage. But in about 2010, I started trying a little bit of zones and virtual machines to do some activities that I didn't want to have run on the file server or the computer specifically. From 2018, I experienced Salt for the first time at a meetup at Geldermalsen, which looked really interesting. And that around the same time, I started having trouble maintaining my systems due to, well, it started to become a little bit more complicated than before. And this year, I also had another experience with lightning strike, and that blew out my router. So, yeah, joy. In 2021, I started, well, this year I started working with Salt. And at first, it was really basic. So the maintenance troubles I started in 2018 was due to me growing my systems piece by piece. So eventually I had different operating systems, different operating system versions, different architectures, and different application install methods, because you don't just repeat the same. Yeah, I didn't have a script or whatever to follow, so I just did what came naturally at that time. And that, in the end, I had a large selection of systems, well, large, about a dozen, with the various, you can see there, with WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, the desktop version with the first WSL version, and the laptop system with the second WLS version, and the rest was also quite mixed. At this time, the biggest problem I had was when I started using an IDE, IntelliJ. I used WSL for a development environment for Python, but both systems had different Python versions. The WSL 1 version had a maximum of 3.5, and the WSL 2 had a 3.8, I think, or 7. And programs which I was writing, I just couldn't. I couldn't continue my work from one desktop to the other, and that was started to get annoying. And the server with Open Solaris was also quite outdated, and yeah, something needed to change. So let's see. So at that point, yeah, that was this year. So I tried to see what I could do. My first experience with Salt was, well, in 2018, I had a meetup at Geldermalsen, and that was very interesting, but it was oriented at web servers and load balancers. And that's not something I use at home because, well, it's not that big of a system. But I started trying, seeing if I could use that to make my systems here a little bit easier to manage, a little bit easier to complete. At first, I just used it as a kind of a program where I could get a command to run on multiple systems simultaneously, which worked. But I mean, it's not the full use you can get out of this. And then at a certain point, let's see. Yeah, I tried to install it on WSL because that was my problem at that time. Both types of WSL were working differently, and they were trying to. They weren't compatible with each other. But WSL does not have an init system. Let's see. It has a screen. Yes. 1 second. Yeah. WSL has nothing in its system. It doesn't have systeminit, it doesn't have systemd, and so daemons or a processor will not start to run automatically. At first I had a workaround in .bashrc, and which you can see there. It's just the last line in bashrc, and I guess you can also put it in the root. This was just in the user bashrc, but it's kind of it doesn't really work well. Sometimes it doesn't get recognized by the master. So if you have a WSL running this, the first time it starts, it generally does try to connect to the master, and it generally does find it, but sometimes it doesn't. WSL2 also doesn't have an init system, but it does have some extra possibilities to start it through wsl.exe. You can start a command through that, and you can actually just use that as a startup script in Windows. So whenever your Windows system starts, it just starts that. And I presume you can also use that to start an SSH daemon. So that might be interesting. But then you would need access to Windows. So the next step will be maybe configure it through Salt, through having the Windows client of Salt, the Windows minion, have that install and configure WSL. And well, I'm not at this point yet, so that's a little bit. I had hoped to have this finished, but yeah, I didn't manage that. But this is the next step, to have a local repository of Windows programs and Windows settings, and maybe with a PowerShell script enable all the Hyper-V requirements and install WSL on the system. The ultimate goal for me is to have a single point of configuration, failure tolerance. So if one of my Raspberry Pis or whatever breaks, that automatically Docker containers will be moved to the other Raspberry Pis. And often enough, I play with new virtual machines, and it would be really nice to have a kind of system where all those virtual machines, all the default settings will be transferred to it, and it will be automatically installed. Man, I've gone through this fast. I'm sorry. This is. Let's see. So, Vagrant. That. Yeah, that's actually Vagrant is actually the system I use with the meetup for the load balancers test with Sue and Salt, which is quite interesting. I wish I was further on, but yeah. So this I'm not at the point yet where I was, hoping to be. I also see Jay, Patrick, Moffat, DC, hi. Yeah. I see a question by Rick Pott. Especially curious for the with Windows part. With my company primarily on Windows, I'm curious of the progress towards Windows as a salt master. It actually works quite nice. Well, Windows as a salt master, that I do not know. I have the salt master running on a Raspberry Pi, so I do not have the experience with the salt master on Windows, but I do know that that everything works fine as a salt minion on Windows. And the repository which I saw, it can find software and it can install it. I use Chocolati first before I started. Now I want to move everything over pretty much to Salt and to, I think there's now in the Windows, here, what's it called? In Windows Terminal, I think there's now also a Windows Package Manager. I do not know what the status is of that. I tried it when it was in beta, and it was it had some troubles with the version types in the way that it sometimes installs a 32-bit version of a piece of software if you need a 64-bit. Yeah, sure. You can please, if you want to drop in, J. Patrick.
All right, I will approve him. There we go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Letting me in was your first mistake.
You're welcome. Please help me.
So we've had this discussion a handful of times. There's obviously in primarily 99% Windows environments, there is a desire. Sometimes this is because different business groups own different slices of the environment. So you might have like a Hyper-V environment. You're virtualizing that way, or something like that. And so there's a desire to be able to use Windows, which should be platform compatible from the Python perspective, to be able to run the Salt Master. And I'll say first, it is a thing like the current test suite. I'm sorry, my cats are all jumping on the table at the same time. Before he knocks everything off of my desk, let me just grab him. There we go.
I can
So he's going to join me for the rest of this part. So basically, the reason that the Windows minion doesn't ship with a Salt Master out of the gate is because there's no test harness for it. So they do use it to confirm a lot of like the Windows LGPO functionality and stuff like that, on the engineering side. And so it does exist, but what's necessary to make that happen, from a pre-sales perspective as a caveat, let me start with, because it's not presented as an official binary, the Windows Master concept is probably going to see a general lack of support, from the Global Support Services Organization perspective, as far as I need help with this, it's not working. If you're okay with that, then you certainly can, install by PyPy, modify the setup.py to be able to enable the Windows Master. And it's only, the binary difference between Salt Master and Salt Minion in terms of what libraries are required is minimal. So it is a buildable thing, but it's essentially would constitute a custom change. It should work, but will you get support if that happens? Maybe. But I mean, probably in most circumstances, if you're doing something like Hyper-V, probably the easiest and best answer is to run like a CentOS, like a small Hyper-V image or something like that, to manage your master. He agrees. And to be able to run things a little bit more natively that way, particularly where we're looking at corporate contexts where we're looking at supportability and uptime and things like that. That would probably be the preferred. If you want to experiment with by all means, for like a home setup, run a Windows master, play with it, break it. Send all of your complaints to Shane Lee. He loves hearing people's experiences with that. So those are valid targets, but I would from a professional standpoint, I would say that's something to engage in if there's a particular need in the environment and you have some risk tolerance as far as everything working with fantastic parity. If that's okay, then by all means go ahead and do it that way. Jump into the community Slack if you want more details on that, and we can certainly provide assistance there.
Is it maybe because I have them? I have the masters. I have 2 masters now. With the failover not really working well yet because I haven't transferred the keys yet. I kind of don't want to, because I kind of want to have each master separate private key. But that would mean I have to connect each client to each master or something. I don't know. But I kind of want to keep them separate in a way, so I'm trying to figure that out still. But would it be otherwise interesting for smaller companies that don't run the Hyper-V systems or the larger scale virtualization systems to have just a couple of either old systems which I can run Linux on, or a couple of Raspberry Pis that just run redundant and have them run as a master for Windows clients. Because in my experience, very, very, very limited experience in days, not weeks or months, the Windows minion kind of works pretty well, except that the first time the configuration file is in a kind of special locked directory, and you have to attain access to that. So you have to make that, you have to get ownership of a certain directory where the salt configuration file is, instead of even with an administrator account. So I guess, yeah, maybe a couple of Raspberry Pis and a good USB power supply, that would maybe be a possibility.
Yeah, not that you're a Windows user, so obviously the answer is you need to learn Linux.
Hey, I'm using CAD software, and that doesn't really run on Windows on Linux.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, that's ultimately the way of things. So there are, it's again, I'll give the kind of standard pro services answer. It depends, right? Whatever is appropriate for your environment, whatever is appropriate for your degree of risk tolerance with your degree of comprehensive implementation, and things like that. It really comes down to what's acceptable and what are the driving factors behind wanting to do things a certain way. There's a lot of, as there always is, right? There's a lot of variability in how you implement.
Yeah. Sounds well. iCAD? No. Autodesk Inventor is way more powerful. But I don't want to advertise, so now I need to name a couple of different ones quickly. Let's see. I think I borked my WSL the other day. Montana Tosca. Yeah. I did that too. I tried to install systemd on WSL. It does not go well. Not advisable. No, it's still working-ish, but it's hanging on a thread, and I really need to install everything there. And that's also it's only been 2-3 weeks or something since I changed a couple of things on my system, and the idea is to have everything now properly, because due to having everything piecewise installed, it was just utter chaos. I mean, different versions, different editions, different. I think there was one Jesse system even with there that didn't really want to upgrade because for I don't know something. So it's I get the pain. Also, WSL is really finicky. Sometimes you can get things that normally would not break a system that tend to do break WSL. So I don't know about that. Yeah, WSL 2, by the way, is way more stable than 1. So that's a good thing, and they are also working on a graphical version that you can have X11, I think, or does it use Wayland? I don't know. Whatever. You can use graphical programs for that. Haven't tried it, but I mean, I don't generally use graphical things anyway. Are there any more? I see. Salt master in a Linux Docker container on Windows. Yeah, that would work. Winget works okay-ish, not quite as nice as Cooper Chocolati. Chocolati works. Chocolati works weird. Every time I try to update my Python, it just throws a 32-bit Python on there. I have to uninstall it and I have to reinstall Python again. Okay, so sorry, rant. I run my personal Salt Master in a VM on Mac. I have no experience on Mac at all. So I think it should work fine. It's a BSD kind of spin-off, but I don't know. You have pretty crispy webcams. Thanks. I actually have a Canon EOS up there, and they have a new firmware kind of thing where you can use it as a webcam. So I just have a DSLR webcam.
Yeah, I'm jealous of their DSLR setups. I'm using a Logitech Brio, but yeah,
that works.
It does. It works fine. Huh.
That's really sharp.
There's a lot of in there. But what I like is Dave has real bokeh in the background there. It's not like a blur filter. That's real photographic excellence there.
I can do that. I just have to change the focus.
Yeah. So there is a question in the QA. Would there be any issues if you change the standard ports to something like 443 and 80? Do you mean of the Salt Master itself?
I would not change it to those ports.
I probably wouldn't. So the technical answer, right, is that you need 2 ports. You need, right, the default is 4505 and 4506. You can tune those away from that. I don't think I would probably want to present those on 443 and 80 if you're not doing a web service of some sort, or at least like an API listener. But I mean, I can't stop you from doing that. It doesn't, I don't know if that specifically by itself solves the problem.
Why would you want to do change the standard ports to those specifically? If you want to have a system behind a firewall which you can access through those ports, I would I guess I would just use a kind of SSL tunnel or SSH tunnel through the 443 port to a subsystem in between that just ports it back. My guess. Any other questions? I know this is a really light talk compared to other talks.
Light talks are good. Do you have any experience using WinRepo, Hans? If that's something that comes into the picture for you, I know that you mentioned using Chocolatey and a couple of others, but I know that in a lot of our customer use cases, we often talk about the use of WinRepo. Using the Salt master to either directly, use the Salt file server to directly provide binaries for Windows systems, or in some cases, where we have people with certain restrictions needing to be able to manipulate the contents of WinRepo to point to local repositories or things like that.
I don't have any experience yet. I've started with it this week, last weekend actually. I saw that the WinRepo ng directory on GitHub is for some software packages quite outdated. So what I'm thinking about, and I don't have it worked out yet, but what I'm thinking about is making a kind of a local repo with all the MSIs or the access and using the basic script of the WinRepo part of Salt to use the local files and just try and use that. But I guess Windows is kind of annoying sometimes because for some pieces of software it's really hard to have a silent install, or at least a silent install in such a way where you can also use specific settings. So yeah, that'll be an experience, I guess, when I start to do that.
Yeah, my thought and my reaction to that a little is that WinRepo at least gives a well-defined, syntactically complete framework for at least providing, that mapping between a package name and the individual versions, and then where to get that and any of the switches associated for doing that silent install and those types of things. So, rather than having to rewrite all of that, you can at least introduce repository behavior.
Exactly. I mean, it just the download link on the SLS file for each package is just a link written in it, and I don't think there's an objection to make that a local download link. So I'm just going to try and make that a salt : / kind of link. Maybe if that works.
Yeah, to my knowledge, any of the valid URIs that are typically handled by Salt, if that's even local file system, or if that comes from salt : / like you said, to use the Salt file server, or if that's some other HTTPS location, or even if it's CIFS, Samba, to be able to grab stuff off of UNC paths should be valid targets as well.
Yeah. That's also a good one, by the way, the CIFS or Samba shares. I had a question a long while ago about someone. He said, well, there's a size limit on the share of on the files you can share from the Salt share. That was something I think was 2 gigs or something, which he came up to, and it was an issue for that. For those kinds of issues, I would think I would rather just make a standard share amount point somewhere, so every system just gets that share with provisioning software or files, and you can access them from that. And you can just use a script that just plugs them from that location to wherever you want to make. You put the script inside the salt share, the salt, something like that. I see. What are some good starter links, hints, and FAQs to read? For starter links, I actually use the salt stack. Let me see. I can just the regular documentation, but I guess it depends on the way you want, way you prefer to have the information. I'm kind of like more like a reference document person and not a how-to person, but there's a really good there's one document, Salt in 10 minutes. I think it's written by Tom. Tutorial walkthrough.
That's the Salt in 10 minutes page.
That's a good one, I think, to start out with. And the one thing that really took a while for me to wrap my head around was the way that modules work. The salt commands you enter or you use in the SLS files, the way those work took me a while to find out. Hey, Till. But once you get it, it's actually quite easy. So it's just literally, you have the all the different modules, and all the parameters for the functions are just added at the end or below that if you're using what's it called? Jenga? The file
Jinja,
type.
the templating, yeah.
Jinja, yeah. But that's if you have any specific questions regarding that, all those kinds of steps I had to figure out. They're now still quite fresh into my brain. So, what is required to secure a salt master? From the security point, there seems to be a lot of issues. First of all, I guess you make a separate user for salt to run under. For me, I'm still figuring things out, and I'm running it under root, which is not really advisable for anything. But I'm still. So I'd say get a different specific salt user and give them give that user the required rights. Also, for if you have a audit system running, if you run it under root, it just audits the root user. If you run it on the salt, it gets the proper user and listed in that system. And secure your files. Use pillars. Pillars are more secure for data. You can have all the variables, passwords, and everything. If you put them in the pillars, you don't have them. You expose them to only the salt minions needed. I think that. Anything else?
I think that covers most of it. I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, kind of the reaction there is, if you're using salt to control machines administratively, at the end of the day, the idea is you are taking actions with administrator level privileges. In the corporate context, that's ultimately one of the answers that salt stack config provides from a role-based access control point of view. How do I limit privilege escalation and things like that? The other kind of side of that is, what else do we kind of what do we expose ourselves to in terms of using other parts of the utility? Salt API in particular on the open source side is something that tends to provide another avenue, because we're, if you're using Rest Cherry Pie, you're providing basically RESTful API call listening to all of the administrative functions that Salt exposes you to. And so the kind of mantra, particularly from like the pro services or implementation side of things, and support is, you should be securing your Salt master as, pretty much one of those golden keystone services in your environment. The risk of exposure is high, pretty much akin to allowing somebody to have your root password. So from that perspective, if somebody has the ability to raise themselves to, I'm going to jump back to the Windows context. If somebody has the ability to raise themselves to be a domain administrator within your domain, it's that same level of exposure, and you should secure it in pretty much the same way. That there definitely are methods, both on the Linux operating system side, as well as in other contexts, to be able to support that. If you want to create a service account, particularly in the Windows context, that the specific Salt Minion service runs as, and you want to give it very specifically, from a least privileged perspective, exactly the permissions it needs to do the things that you want it to do, then those are ultimately valid targets, again, depending on your environment and depending on the things that you need to be using Salt for.
That sounds indeed really good. I hadn't even thought about it in a way, as you mentioned, the Keystone device, that is the device. But yeah, I do only use those two Raspberry Pis for Bind 9 and the Salt Master. So they are pretty much they are quite clean in the way that there are no really strange things running on that, and it's all and Bind 9 is, I don't know, but pretty well used, so I guess it's pretty well secured. So but yeah, that's a good point.
Hey, to your point, Todd, if you give somebody access to run any Salt command in your environment, I mean, that is, Salt itself on the Minion side, particularly in the Linux environment, it runs as root. So they are root. If they could log in as root and do that, then they'll be able to do the same thing through Salt. That ultimately is at the end of the day, the level of access that we're typically talking about. There are ways to limit that. You can push people into specifically using sudors in the context of Salt Stack config. As it's sold as an enterprise product, you can formalize specific targets as target groups, something Dave Christensen feels strongly about. And you can do the same thing for jobs. You can assert role-based access control to allow specific visibility of individual groups of machines and specific jobs, so you can kind of jail users into doing specific things, from a perspective of what implications that has on privilege escalation and allowing somebody to do something that normally they wouldn't be able to do. On the CLI side, if you're giving somebody absolute access to run any Salt command they want, then yes, that means that they have the ability to run any of those administrative commands against any of your machines. So, I mean, from that standpoint, the idea of handling those things from a separation of duties and a least privilege perspective, yes, there are definitely challenges there. There are a number of subsystems within Linux, within Windows, within Salt, and within Salt Stack config to manage those. So there are different shapes to the way that you manage those things, but it does exist.
How do you mean, Rick?
So yeah, there are a couple of things. There's EOF for salt, so you can because it feels a little kludgy. I tend not to promote external auth for specific salt command invocation because it starts to turn into I will allow use of these specific targets and these specific salt modules and functions in terms of what somebody is allowed to execute. And then that in turn also starts to look like, I can give specific access to these individual salt state files and things like that to prevent somebody from writing their own state file and then just running whatever they want. So if you give somebody willy-nilly access to run any state.apply, then implicitly they can write their own state file and do whatever they want again anyway. So there are systems in place to handle those things. The corporate level answer is salt stack config handles those things. The salt open answer to that is, there are a handful of modules and things like that in place. If you want to do anything other than lock somebody into a direct, add into the sudoers file that they can salt some specific group of targets, salt big G kernel equals Linux, do this diagnostic thing, and then thus prevent anybody from doing anything other than diagnostics or whatever appropriate to whatever group they're in, then there are things that you can do around that. There are also some other subsystems within there that unraveling something like EOF is a talk to it all unto itself. So I won't get deeply into that, but those systems do exist. There's some finagling ultimately if it's something that has corporate level impact, which administrative privileges always do. That's why a lot of our companies spend as much money as they do on, compliance and audit and those types of things. Then ultimately, it's something that demands that level of attention. That's why SaltStack Incorporated, prior to the acquisition, built SaltStack Enterprise and then marketed it that way.
I guess it's also it's if you have access to change system properties, which normally you would have root access for. If you don't have salt, you also need root access for those kinds of operations. So it's you just have to make sure that you have a good you don't have, just don't give people access you don't trust. Yeah, that's yeah.
Awesome. Well, looks like we're about at time here. Hans, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and Patrick, thanks for the assist, and thanks for everyone who participated.
Thank you very much.
we after this is a networking hour, and then day 2 starts tomorrow at the same time.
Yes, everybody go do your salty speed dating. It's really exciting. They've added a function that you can extend time, because like a minute and a half is really not enough to get beyond like the initial introductions. But do jump in. There are a lot of the original Salt team is very, very well represented in the speed. I should stop calling it speed dating, in the networking function. And but we're all excited to talk to you guys about whatever you want. We all have our different journeys through using Salt and what we do. We're happy to share all of that with you guys.
Awesome.
And whatever you do with salt adds flavor. So
awesome. Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.